This is the Unshakable Self, the podcast where we explore what it means to live boldly, authentically, and unshakable in your power. I'm Seryna Myers, a sacred soul strategist who's here to help you step into the fullest expression of who you are, no matter where you are or who's watching. This podcast is your spark to think bigger, dig deeper, and take one unapologetic step closer to living your truth. Are you ready? Let's get into it. Hey friend, today we are going to talk about belonging. Now, if you are one of the rare individuals who has always belonged, always fit in, has never had any problems with social awkwardness, this episode isn't for you, but also maybe it is for you because what are the chances? What are the chances that you have been truly honoring yourself this entire damn time and you've never found it awkward? If that is the case, then you have something to teach all of us. However, this episode literally dropped in for me 5 minutes ago when I was buck naked in the shower. And it actually starts off with an apology. And now the worst part is that this is an apology that should have happened like 30-ish years ago, I guess. And I don't even know the name of the person that it's directed to. With that, this also probably should have been an episode that I recorded before I rebranded the podcast because the old show was called Confessions of a Former Mean Girl. I'm about to confess to some former mean girl shit. So when I was in grade 12 in Kelowna, so I was in a new school, I'd moved across the country. I did actually struggle to find friends because these were all people who'd grown up together in this small town. And then there was me, who is like the infiltrator from back east. I definitely was on a quest for belonging. And with that as well, though, I was at this place where I was really trying to redefine myself. I saw this as like a clean slate, a fresh start. No one knew who I was. No one knew that I came from crime and poverty and that, you know, my mom was the local drug dealer and that I was surrounded by violence and addiction and all of the stuff that I grew up with. And I thought, this is my chance for a fresh start. And the first group of friends who sort of took me in were these sweet, like geeky, like people who did like Ren fairs and role playing and LARPing and that kind of thing. Super loving, accepting people. And the first chance I got to hang out with a cooler crowd, I absolutely ditched. And those are actually not the people that I'm here to apologize to because they were fine without me. I think it was sort of like, yeah, okay, whatever. See you later. Thanks for coming. I don't think there was any love lost there, but there was this girl. Now, I spent a lot of time in the library, and I did it at my old school as well because I was an internet girly. I was, one of those people using the old school chat rooms, and I'm not talking MSN, I'm not talking ICQ, I'm talking like before that, which is strangely where I met my wife in 2012, but that's a story for another day. I was, it's funny because I did not identify with being a geeky person, but I clearly fucking was. And I used to hang out in the library. And I think that's where a lot of loner types hung out. And there was a girl. And she was a little bit goth and I think she identified as a witch. She had like a spooky persona, think like Wednesday Addams, but without the charm of that dry wit. And also less violence. She wasn't violent at all. She was just this sweet, spooky kid. And she recognized a kindred soul in me. I don't know how, I don't know what we talked about. I can't remember any of that because, there's a part of me that obviously protected myself in the shittiness that I'm about to describe. But once I ended up in this circle with these, cooler friends, and I had the best friend who I still have today, actually, I met her there. We referred to her as scary little witch girl, and we would throw what we called mental boulders at her. So we would picture these like little boulders that we would throw with our mind, which like, that's really dorky too. we don't need to remind me how ridiculous and incongruent I was living. And I should have been a safe space. Now, we are talking about benefit of hindsight, and I'm saying this as like someone in my 40s versus being 17 and awkward in this new school and new environment and trying to start fresh and whatever. I have compassion for myself because I could not be that safe space. But I was reading tarot cards at 14 years old. I learned to read on playing cards when I was 12. So it's natural that she saw something in me that resonated with her. You know, it was like the weirdness in me, honors the weirdness in you. She could see my weirdness. She liked it. She thought I was super cool. And I don't think I ever called her scary little witch girl to her face, but I'm sure she could tell that as soon as I was with my friend that I had nothing to do with her and that I'd freeze her out. And she probably knew that we laughed at her. And this is where I'm like, I don't even remember this girl's name. And I am so sorry. I'm sorry that I couldn't be so unshakable in myself. Part of that, of course, being that I didn't even know who the fuck that was. But that I would abandon the sweetness that could have been in our friendship and our connection for someone cooler, for perception, for belonging. Now, these tales from high school, they are not unique to me. We all have them where we've either been the bully or the bullied. But where I find it interesting is beyond high school. And I'm not talking just small towns. Kelowna was a small town. It's grown into like a little bit of a city now. But like, I'm not talking about just small towns. I'm talking about everywhere. I'm talking about the internet. Where do we pull out our claws for clout? Where do we reject others because there is something uncomfortable that we can see about ourselves in them? We are all these mirrors for each other all the time. It's one of the reasons we'll see the hugest homophobes being closeted gay people themselves. I've always loved the work of Gabor Maté, and he comes up in conversation with my therapist whenever we're talking about my family, because I do not belong with my family. And it creates a big rejection wound because I would rather choose me, choose my truth, my comfort, my myself, my needs over fitting into a dynamic with people that make me feel like shit, who have decided that my otherness, my difference is somehow saying that I'm better than. I don't feel like I'm better than. I feel like I'm different than. And never has the feelings of all of this been summed up as well as a t-shirt I saw online yesterday that literally said, "Not my mom's favorite." I was like, ouch. And yes. But coming back to Gabor. So Dr. Maté has this quote, and he says, "We're born with a need for attachment and a need for authenticity." And so we can see how those two things are going to be at war with each other, right? He goes on to say, most people abandon their true selves, authenticity, to please others and keep the relationships, attachment, even if they are ones that are toxic and destructive. And it makes sense. There is this primal need for belonging. There was a time that it was literally life or death to be cast out. And so we have this need to be our true selves in whatever that means. It could be in our beliefs. It could be the things that we eat. It could be lifestyle choices. It could be our sexuality. It can be even just like what we will allow ourselves to say. Do you remember being a kid and like you've learned all your swear words, but you have to be so careful not to say them in front of your parents? Like, how much energy did that take up? Now imagine that being like your entire personality that you can't share. It's not just your parents, it's everybody. And how anxiety inducing and exhausting that would be to have to hold all of that in. Now, in the first episode, we talked about how there's sometimes consequences to our authenticity, how, we are being disruptive. If our path has been to people please or to mask or to code switch and to accommodate, it can be really disruptive to our dynamics because people expect us to show up the way that we've always showed up. Now, the thing is, this isn't just about authenticity. This is any kind of shift that we make in our personalities. People who discover spirituality and have this like incredible experience and they feel really good and then they want to convert all of their friends. It happens with them too. And it's well intended. But as much as there is a part of us that loves the dopamine hit of novelty that comes from our experiences, our foods, how we navigate life, we don't like it in our social relationships. We feel comfortable when things are predictable. And so when someone makes a change, that is disruptive. And I say this as someone who, after 7 years of being married to a man, found myself married to a woman because she realized that that was her truth and her authenticity. So, I definitely know what it's like to be on both sides of this coin of the person who has made these changes and decides to honor themselves and the person who is receiving someone who has made a major change and is honoring themselves. It's not fucking easy. And who would I be to expect that I have the space to be my whole self and to be accepted for that or not? But certainly in my marriage, expected to be accepted, and then not offer her that in return. And so I think this is something that we need to definitely recognize within ourselves. If we decide that we want to be our true selves, we also need to be chill when other people are doing the same, because we do become these beacons of light of what's possible. We do become an example to follow, whether we like it or not. And we will often see it in our children when they start to express themselves and have some degree of autonomy. And I don't know how many times I've heard a mother say, "Oh God, she or he is just like me." And we get to see that like mirrored back. And most people say that when they're shaking their heads and they're apologizing to their mothers for how they behaved. But every so often I hear someone say that, and they say that about their child, and then they're just like, yeah, because they know they get to do it differently this time. They know that they want to consciously enter into that parenting relationship where that child is free, and they get to find out in some ways what life would have been like if they'd had that supportive environment to grow up in themselves. So if we are born with a biological need for both attachment and authenticity, that sort of asks us to curate our lives so that the people that we are attached to are the people who love, honor, accept, celebrate our authentic selves. This is a lot easier to do if they didn't know you before. If you've started your authenticity journey, you make a new best friend tomorrow, everything is like a fresh start. That's great. But what about everybody else? Most people are not willing to just burn their life down and start fresh, nor should you. Like, there is something really beautiful about having relationships, but particularly friendships with people who have seen you at all the different iterations and stages of who you are. But it means that you have to be willing to do the work. They're going to need a little bit of grace. Now, if they are horrible and fucking abusive, well, that is a different conversation. And perhaps that is a situation that you should step away from. I am not your therapist. That's not my job to tell you. But when these are relationships that you want to be in, that do fulfill you in every way except up to this point, like being your authentic self. When these are relationships that you don't want to step away from, it helps to have those hard conversations. And they are hard. They are going to ask you to be big brave. And you also are going to need to give them some grace, because when you set a boundary and they're not used to it, there's going to be a bit of pushback, and they're going to go, "Oh, you've changed." And you're going to say, "Yeah, isn't it great?" And you need to make sure that you are this is why the conversation happens about the unshakable self. You need to be really anchored in so that you're not fully you one day and doormatting the next day. And even though this is something that I teach, even though this is something I've been living for like 15-ish years, I mean, I still catch myself sometimes where I bite my tongue or I hold back with my wife, and I'll wait for like another opportunity to have the conversation. I did this particularly with her transition. I, in full transparency, I knew the consequences of not having a good coming out experience. I know that it is oftentimes like literally life or death for people. And I made a commitment within my own heart that, up until her surgery, that everything would be about her. And it meant that a lot of my stuff got put on the back burner. And there were times where I felt really stifled. There were times where I felt disconnected and lost from who I even was, because so much of it was about what do we need to do to support her. And that was every time we even left the house. I was fiercely protective. It was like no one was going to fuck with my wife. No one was going to misgender her. No one was going to like say anything shitty. Like she would always say, "Oh, you're my lioness." And I was. But it also like didn't leave a lot of space for my feelings about the fact that my entire marriage had changed and that our social dynamic changed because now we were a same-sex couple. And it was like a pretty big thing. And this is why I decided to start going to therapy, because 2 years of conscious self-abandonment, I feel like self-abandonment is sometimes a little easier if you don't actually know you're doing it. It's uncomfortable, but like you don't recognize in the moment of I am not choosing me right now. And like I kind of want to cry just telling you that, to be honest. It fucking sucked. After 2-ish years of consciously choosing her over me in all of these moments, I started getting really resentful. Even though it was my choice, even though she never, ever, ever would ask me to do something like that, I got resentful. And like, how shitty is that to resent someone for something they didn't even have a say in? I did it. And it's hard to see that. It's hard to admit that. It's hard to know that that hurt that I felt was caused by me. You do it to yourself, you do, and that's why it really hurts. Yeah. And so, yeah, with therapy and with embodiment and with just honestly taking the space to remember that I am that bitch. That was the term that came through for me. To recognize my magic, to experience it in these different ways, and to just like feel my vitality and my vibrancy come back. It was really exciting getting to know me again, getting to share me again. Because I'm a really bright light. And to just be this like sad little bulb like flickering on the edge of burning out, like that was no way to live. And again, I do say that like the pain of consciously choosing to self-abandon is worse than self-abandoning by default or programming or conditioning. But like, regardless, it fucking sucks. And if you're there, if you have been living your life in that way, I can tell you that you can change. You can choose differently. I'm not saying it's easy, but you can change. You can choose differently. And you can find yourself again. I mean, that's a huge part of the coaching work that I do with people. A lot of the times people come to me because they've had a massive change in their life, whether it's because they want to leave their job or their marriage ended, or they've had a health scare, or they're empty nesting, or whatever the situation is. They have had a major change and they want to navigate it, and they don't know how, because the programming and conditioning that has gotten them to this point has not empowered them to trust themselves enough to know what to do next. So the huge first part of the work is like surrendering old identities that don't even fit anymore. It's recognizing the ways that we self-abandon and going back to those moments and reclaiming those little lost parts of ourselves. It's an integration and a remembering of who you are and a rebirthing of that person from this new conscious way of being. Because now it's not something that you have denied and repressed. Pardon me. This is something you are actively participating in and consciously creating. Then you get to be that bitch. And it's pretty fucking cool. I'm not going to lie. We need to belong to ourselves first. We need to know who we are. We need to have the term, before I said unshakable self, I talked about unshakable certainty, in being so secure in who you are and what you create in the world and what your magic is, that it's just undeniable. That whenever you receive any kind of rejection of that or pushback, that it's almost laughable. The example I always like to use, my nanny was like maybe 5'3" or so, but she was also in a wheelchair. So she was very low to the ground. I'm only 5'6". And she would tell me all the time how tall I am. And like comparatively, yes. And also she has the lower physical perspective from being in her wheelchair, or had, sorry, she passed away last year. And I think she was just used to women around her height. So me being 5'6" to her was this very tall, like, thing. And I know with complete, certainty that I am average. I'm average at best. 5'5" to 5'7", like, we're talking average. Whereas when we start getting into 5'8", 5'9", 5'10", 6 feet, like, that is a tall woman. And I am confidently average. And so when she would tell me, "Oh, you're so tall," like, it would make me laugh, because I was just like, "No, Nanny, you're just short and lower to the ground." It's not that I'm tall at all. And, I need to be so unshakable in all aspects of my personality, as much as I am with my physical ones, that when someone tells me my eyes are brown, I can be like, "No, my eyes are green." And that doesn't shake me to my core. It doesn't challenge how I view the world or view myself. I just go, "No, my eyes are green," the end. I am not tall, I'm average, the end. Like, we need to be like that about everything in our lives. Now, when we're talking about personality things or values or our integrity and these kind of more like ambiguous things rather than like physical traits that are very calculable and measurable, it does help to kind of take a pause, especially if this is someone that you love and respect and you know that they are not just being an asshole. It does help to pause and say, like, is there something for me here? Is this something that I don't see about myself? This is where outside therapists actually help a lot too. Because I will show up to the table with the things that are projected onto me and be like, is there any validity to this? I don't think so, but I just need a little bit of a gut check. And we need that. We need that outside perspective. But particularly when it's somebody that you love and trust and respect, if they are saying something that is critical about where you are, it does take, if you were able to, ideally without it shaking you to your core, it does help to have a pause and say, hang on a second, is there something for me here? And if you discover that there is, then it's doing that reclamation work. Then it's exploring why you couldn't see it before. It's being grateful for the perspective from the person on the outside. And likewise, when you catch yourself in those old habits of people pleasing, of self-censoring, of compromising your needs, saying yes when you mean no and no when you mean yes, when you catch yourself in those things, ask yourself, do I want to belong in this space? And if so, am I able to belong in this space as my authentic self? And if the answer to that is no, then we need to come back to, why do I feel like I need to belong to this space? Where do I need to belong to myself more? And again, there is a bit of culling that has to happen sometimes. There is a curating, and it happens in your social media feed, and it happens in the people that you go for coffee with and the people you spend your time with, and even the dynamics at work. Sometimes it means getting a new job. I cannot tell you what it was like for me in corporate. This little spicy Chiquita who's like going into work trying to be a suit, when I came up from, like, for lack of a better word, the ghetto. Like, I grew up in such shitty circumstances. And when I started corporate, I was really rough around the edges. I was really hardened. I was very protective because that is what I needed for survival growing up. And then here I was playing dress up in a suit with neon orange shoes because I had to find some way to express myself. I felt trapped by the clothes that I wore. I had these like weird rebellions, like my shoes, or when I bleached my hair, like it was some sort of fuck you. But the person I was truly mad at was myself, because I'm the one who went out for this job that I didn't present my true self with. And like, truthfully, like when I started my spiritual path, after 6 months, I ended up laid off. It was during the recession, but like the timing of it didn't make sense. And a huge part of that was that I personally think that was spirit looking out for me. I don't think me, the spiritual person, could have existed without being stifled and squashed in that particular space. It was horribly toxic. So we do have these elements that are going to blow up. We need to honor those endings and honor the grief and really make space in that grief of reminding ourselves that it was them or us. Either I'm grieving the abandonment of myself and the pretending that my needs don't matter, or I'm grieving the ending of that dynamic, that relationship, that situation, whatever it is, because I don't belong there. None of this is easy work, friend. I'm not ever going to tell you that it is. But the more you immerse yourself in this world that encourages your truth, and that includes listening to a show like this one, the more natural it's going to feel. And the more natural it feels, the easier it gets. The stronger the muscle, the more you work it. When you get pushback, it becomes easier to flex it. It becomes like muscle memory, and it's just the natural, easy thing. And sometimes you're going to get triggered and you're going to like witness those old parts come up, and you're going to love yourself. This is not the time to judge or shame or expect ourselves to be perfect. This is an invitation to explore yourself with neutrality, where you're not making anything good or bad, and just do your best to honor yourself throughout. That's the mission. Okay, so that is it for this episode. It is time for me to get out of my robe, put on some pants, and actually do this day. Thanks for coming and hanging out with me. Thanks for giving this some consideration. And I can't wait to hear what seeds are planted as a result. So feel free to reach out to me on Instagram or Facebook, wherever. I will make sure the links are in the show notes. And I look forward to catching up with you next time. Hey friend, don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And of course, if you are enjoying the show, please take a quick second, leave us a review. It helps us find more unshakable souls just like you. Check the show notes out for all the links. I will see you in the next one.